My name is Emily Sanchez. I'm a PhD student here at Friedman, and I'll be moderating our opening session today along with Ryan Simpson, a PhD candidate at the Friedman School as well. Before we begin, we wish to inform you that this session is being recorded for potential publishing on our symposium website. So if you'd like to modify your name or shut off your video, you can do so. And we ask that all attendees keep their audio off until the audience-led question and answer period at the end of the session. Additionally, we'll aim to finish the session 5 to 10 minutes early to allow for ease of transitioning into upcoming sessions. But with that, it is our privilege, and pleasure to welcome our keynote address for this year's symposium, Dr. Nathaniel Newlands. Dr. Newlands is a research scientist with the Government of Canada based at the Summerland Research and Development Centre in British Columbia, Canada, and is also an adjunct professor in geography with the University of Victoria, Canada. Dr. Newlands' research work addresses public good, food, water, energy nexus issues and tackles broad, integrated, complex global problems to help support and advance global sustainable development. He is currently conducting research in climate smart agriculture and developing novel models and tools using artificial intelligence and satellite data to improve forecasting of agricultural crop yield, disease risk, and extreme event impacts. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Nathaniel Newlands.
Thanks very much, Emily. And first, I'd like to thank the organizers, Elena, Ryan, Emily, and many others who've organized such a great event. And I was happy to attend yesterday's, panel presentations and discussions on next steps after COVID-26, and I enjoyed that in terms of, nexus issues with food, nutrition, and agriculture. And I guess before we begin, I'd like to just acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Okanagan Syilx people, and I recognize, honor, and respect the presence of Indigenous people, past, present, and future. So today, in the 30 minutes I have, I'll speak to you about data science solutions and to complex interlinked issues that we're all looking at. And what I'm going to try and convince you is that a lot of the challenges we face, which can be daunting and hard to unravel the complexity and difficult to understand how we can even approach some of them, there's really opportunity there. And as many have said, we have to think of a way of restructuring what we're doing, innovating in different ways to do this. So let me begin here. Well, I've had a bit of an introduction there. Thank you so much. And yes, I'm based in Western Canada, where we've had in recent years, heat waves, heat domes, much like the California, Oregon, and Washington. And we've also had this last year a major flooding event that really decimated an agricultural zone, dairy and other cropping, actually berries and tree fruit area of our province. So lots to deal with already with extreme events. I do have a number of other roles. I'm a vice chair of international relations and statistics for the American Statistical Association and a North American regional officer also for the International Environmetric Society. Also co-chairing currently for the group of Earth observations on disaster risk reduction working group. For those who are interested, I recently did an AI and agricultural podcast looking at some of the potential implications of AI, and I've provided a link there along with some other social media and web links. So encourage you to follow up after this talk and share ideas and build from what we discuss and the ideas we share today. So for this webinar, I've really purposely kept things general, broad perspective, general introduction to data science, AI, and big data, and get everyone to sort of think about the broad picture, big picture, and look at the key challenges and opportunities really gleaned from my experience, my work research and operational type experience. So I've really avoided not getting too deep or technical, and I've managed to do no equations. But for those who love equations and the math and stats and things, computers, algorithms, there's a deep learning short course that I've presented in Mexico and Malaysia, both with TIES and the ISI. Definitely, I'm looking for building some actual working examples with nutrition data. So if others, students out there, have some data sets that they can free up and we can do some machine learning on and use them as demonstrations as part of this building this course up, that would be great. I'm not sure whenever in-person presentations begin again, I'll look to presenting that somewhere. Just a couple key kind of roadmaps. I was involved with some leading statisticians in the US, looking at a review of data science statistical methods, particularly focused on insurance risk in the face of climate change. So many of you might be interested to read that. And also for those who are interested in, well, what is the field of artificial intelligence and where is it going? There is a 20-year community roadmap for AI in the US, but it's pretty broadly applicable. And that was done in 2019. So I've provided a link there. And I believe Ryan, Emily will share the slides for you, so you don't have to write it all down. So okay, I'd also encourage you, I wrote a book in 2016. It's called Future Sustainable Ecosystems, looking specifically at complexity, risk, and uncertainty and trying to tie it together. And it was really trying to look at what we're dealing with, which is polarized perspectives, cultural cognition, groups, cultural societies look at risk in different ways, and we have to embed that, I guess, in our solutions, and also to work with integrated risk concepts, models, frameworks, and to promote, also use tools that promote open dialogue, not just provide sort of one solution, one idea or solution. Looking at evidence, the importance of evidence-based decision-making and knowledge integration, and ways that we can rapidly learn from situations, combine human and artificial machine intelligence for monitoring, assessment, and forecasting. So I hope this is an ebook. It should be available through your library. And just for those wondering, all royalties go to the Queen, to the Crown. So, well, we've been dealing with really quite a disruption with COVID, as we all know. And how has it affected agricultural systems and global supply chains? Well, I think a lot of us might be aware of the short term, up to 3 months kind of impacts, but I think where it goes from here over medium, long term, many of us would have questions. I think some things we may not think about is the stockpiling of food reserves, particularly for international food aid and constraints there as we move forward. And looking at long-term effects of poor diets on children, women, and others. And so there's really a lot of work that could be done on trying to understand what the long-term risks and consequences are, even if we are inundated with another wave. But so there's waves of impacts, ripple effects, prolonged consequences for human and environmental health. And I think we need to learn from this, that this is the beginning of dealing with climate change and lots of other consequences of climate change, extreme events. So the faster we learn here, how we bring different methodologies together will benefit us. And we have to look at direct, indirect variables. We have to look at controllable, uncontrollable situations and foreseen and unforeseen events. It's really accentuated the knowledge gaps and really a lack in some cases of operational readiness. So, we still need to understand better what are our supply chains, what are the complex dependencies, what kind of actions can we do to recover and build resiliency, and really explore what I call possibility space. What are the essential variables we need to measure? What kind of counterfactual scenarios do we need to explore? And get some agreement on what these scenarios are, so we can tie in our various analyses. What is the uncertainty in disease, climate, and disaster risk forecasts? What is the baseline uncertainty? Savary et al. In the 2020 paper I've cited there has started to look at this. And just a little bit further, we're all aware of the, sometimes they talk about 4 dimensions of food security and nutrition. Here there's 6. And this was work by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition that's really dug deep into what COVID impacts are in each of these dimensions. And one of them that was raised in the panel discussion yesterday was inequality in ICT, information communication technology access, and I think that's a very important one. And there's, I guess my main point here is there's lots of aspects here, and how we tie those into analyses is a real challenge. What they came up with was that there's really some key urgent policy shifts, and this may be old news for many people, but certainly it really helps to have this from at the higher level from policy decision makers. Transformation of food systems as a whole. Okay, we need to look at big picture big thinking in transforming our food systems. Obviously, that's going to mean different transformation for different systems, right? So we need to shape food policies to better recognize intersystem linkages. We need to incorporate complex interaction of malnutrition, hunger, undernutrition, obesity, micronutrient deficiency, and allergies, and look far more at context specificity, flexibility, and take into account specific groups, populations, and location. Well, Canada has a new food policy, and that was, I guess, at the beginning of COVID in 2019, and it seeks to increase the integration and coordination of food-related policies and programs. And its vision is all people in Canada are able to access a sufficient amount of safe, nutritious, and culturally diverse food. And I think the point I want to make here is that Canada's, developed country, wealthy compared to many, and yet still we suffer from, huge high food waste, up to 40%, compared to the 1.3 billion globally reported by the FAO per year. We're increasing food security, 4.4 million people, anywhere from 13 to say 15% for 1 in 7 households, which is really staggering. And particularly there's more information needed in Canada's northern communities. You see in the upper right figure there, it's gray. There's really very little information even to report on there. So that's a knowledge gap, a data gap that needs to be addressed. Obesity is very high, defined as a sort of body mass index greater than 30. In 22 was 27% increased due to COVID and other pressures, from 15% in BC, where I live, British Columbia, and 28% in Newfoundland, Labrador, in the East Coast. And of course, what's adding to all this is supply chain issues, extreme weather events that are maybe unanticipated, and climate trends may be anticipated. So there's lots of challenges there, but even the developed world needs to worry and concern themselves about this. As many of us are aware, we have Sustainable Development Goals, which are a call to action for transformative change. So even at the international level, we have this major international policy and environment that is conducive to making food systems healthy and sustainable. So we're in a really good policy environment. The question is, how do we bring all our data, statistics, data science methods, how do we bring them to bear under each of these goals? And I've just highlighted two. Goal two is on end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. And goal 13, which is take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And of course, there's many others that relate to marine aquatic systems. And we're also in the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition that lasts until 2025, which is to eradicate malnutrition in all forms in all countries. So within this conducive international policy framework, what is it we can do as statisticians, data scientists, and other professionals to bring our expertise and information knowledge to the betterment of society? Well, we all know about food systems and sustainability. Let's just go through quickly some definitions. So when we define a food system, it's really defined by all interlinked processes, people, infrastructure, and the value added activities. Okay, so and the activities are important. A sustainable food system is essentially designed to not compromise the economic, social, and environmental bases for generating food security and nutrition for future generations. And then we define sustainable diets as a low impact scenario and to promote healthy life for present and future generations. When we talk about sustainable foods, blue aquatic foods, as we were mentioning yesterday in the panel discussion yesterday, one of the things I wonder is whether there is a scientific or legal definition for these for that as well. That would be interesting to, if it's not, it should be defined, right? Also, I wanted to mention the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization now has a strategic framework up to 2031, which is really trying to leave no one behind. It's better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. So I'd encourage you to look at that if you have some time. But just before I leave this slide, the upper slide there is really to think of food systems as landscapes, to not lose the temporal, the spatial aspects, that they're really dynamical systems. And as mentioned, the nexus issues, the energy, the water, the nutrients, how it all interweaves. I think there's a lot more that could be done on understanding integrated crop livestock systems as well. So integrated pest management as well, and ways to trade-offs and ways to make things sustainable in terms of the currently detrimental interactions that exist. The slide or diagram below looks at the different components of sustainability. And while sustainable food systems is right there in the center, we have to acknowledge that there's these other overlaps of green growth, inclusive growth, eco-social progress, and also give them some consideration and maybe work in those domains as well, if it's difficult to jump right to larger transformations. But there's another way of looking at all this. While we look at the systems that we want in the future, we want to design, we want to transform to, one way to look at this is also not so much in a negative way, but to look at the risk side of it. So you can look at the world of risk underlying getting from where we are to designing these systems. And it's really interconnected. You have hazard risk that are more pure, arising from loss exposures, operational risk arises from people, processes, systems, and controls, and then more speculative types of risk, of financial risk, and longer term trends, strategic risk. So how do we put all this together in terms of an integrated risk profile for systems that we're looking at transforming? One of the things I wanted to say was that urbanization really creates, I guess, augments the problem of integrated risk. The world's population is set to reach 8.5 billion, I believe, by 2030. 55% are now residing in urban areas, consuming 70% of global food supply. And with urbanization comes issues with water quality, land deforestation, air pollution, biodiversity loss. So, and a lot of changes as between rural, peri-urban, urban areas can take place with lockdowns and other types of events, which can increase food demand in different areas. So if there's any silver lining at all with the COVID crisis, maybe one of the things is that it's going to trigger an overdue transformation of agricultural systems, more importance of more local supply of food, and consideration of nutrition and other issues. So maybe that will be one benefit. But certainly, this sort of almost like an epidemic itself of urbanization is going to lead to higher vulnerability, exposing humans and our activities to climate change, extreme weather, and economic shocks. Just want to say something about the role of urban agriculture and food security. And I really see that urban agriculture is an opportunity for our societies to redesign and build resilience. So again, turning around the situation we see in our urban areas, can we build green infrastructure, plant soil systems to reduce flows to sewer systems and surface waters? Can we build the supply resilience of food, cultivate, process, distribute food, urban beekeeping, horticulture, aquaculture? There's many different businesses now looking at this, vertical agriculture. And the idea is that we build systems, landscapes that are more resilient to the pressures of extreme events. And I can give you the example of Lytton, BC, here in our province in June 30th, was completely wiped out by wildfire. And the idea here is that if you build buffers and other ways of trying to stop basically the wildfire from hitting cities and wiping them out entirely. And that brings me to talk about disaster risk reduction, where I'm doing some work. A lot of this is systemic, emergent collective behavior. When you look at wildfire behavior, again, we have to look at multi-hazard risks, not just one potential hazard. And I think there's a lot more work that could be done in complex adaptive systems that I was investigating way back in my PhD postdoc years. And I think I haven't seen a lot of development there. I think understanding how we can build adaptive systems without even talking about AI, can we build them into even traditional methods? Some idea of adaptive behavior. And also, we need to find ways of, in this transformation we're talking about, of exploiting regenerative adaptive potential of ecosystems. So really ask the question, how does nature do it? How has nature been doing it? Can we mimic some of those processes in an artificial way? Can we utilize them, and that's something called nature-based solutions. If you haven't heard, there's lots of work done by the FAO and others. Nature Conservancy has teamed up with the FAO, and they have a couple reports if you're interested. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple I thought were really important diagrams, concepts, and this is from the UN's Global Assessment Report. There is a new one coming out in, I believe, 2022, but this is from the 2019 report. And the upper figure really tries to convey that where we are is we're kind of more reactive, right, to these situations. We're responding as best we can. Things are perhaps more destructive as a result of lack of coordination and planning, really not understanding how to prevent the risks. The idea is that alongside this idea of becoming more sustainable, that we're actually more risk informed. So our systems actually respond more rapidly, more effectively to the risks. And the idea is that we're also then living in a future where we have a national disaster risk plans, and many countries don't, and that we understand how the risks can percolate and add to each other and I guess accumulate. So a lot of the response and management side really needs to be enabled with statistics and data science methods. And the figure below, it's not all changing these systems, obviously goes far beyond just the systems themselves. We're now looking at really unpredictable tipping points, crop failures, disease risks, emergent and resident diseases, changes in the market, so pricing spikes, water conflicts, and systemic failures, ideas of migration, civil unrest, riots, and war, and other things. So we can have really disparate kind of effects, indirect effects, changing what we're doing and trying to make more sustainable systems. And how are we going to deal with that? Do we have the safeguards for this kind of thing? So what it really comes down to is having enhanced decision-making and foresight. Really embracing uncertainty and realizing that what we're trying to do is immediately difficult to anticipate, understand, or plan ahead. So how do we do it? Acknowledging the uncertainty. Can we estimate the reducible uncertainty compared to the irreducible uncertainties? This is a figure just to illustrate from the World Meteorological Organization's disaster risk reduction program. And you'll see, there's all kinds of different responses that we can do. Responses and relief operations from minutes to hours to days, preparedness planning from weeks to months to seasons, and longer term strategic planning and scenario building, for humanitarian applications. But it's going to take a different integration of our information from coordination for alerts, forecasts, threat assessments, longer term outlooks and guidance and scenarios. So I think a good way of thinking of that is not all variables are important at the same time, right? Some applications will require hourly, near real time kind of methods, others don't. And understanding where we can draw some of those lines on the data side to make our work simpler, maybe more straightforward, maybe faster on a computational sense is really important. So the context of the model you're putting together, spend time looking at that context and the design of a model. Don't just necessarily adopt a design just because you see it in a research paper. Really think about the operational side of your problem. And I think also under there, you'll see sort of the forecast uncertainty. Think about, is there ways of building scenarios into the work you're doing, whether it's bootstrapping that from the data you have, or out of sample kind of validation, that kind of thing, to look at a broader forecast uncertainty estimation. There's major changes, issues with insurance, and I encourage anyone who's interested to get involved in that, because we're currently looking at a scenario there where we have pretty rare high impact events, but very many high frequency low impact events, and so that whole curve is going to change. The risk sharing between public and private is going to change, and it's going to have huge impacts for how we respond financially, economically, and other ways to these extreme events. So I wanted to say a few mentioned about early warning systems, but I think in terms of time, I'll skip over this. But just to say that there are a number of systems available, and they're trying to look at as a way to become more broadly integrated sort of technology more broadly available to people in developed and developing countries. And I think I've listed a number of key aspects to developing these. Just want to skip over a few. So let's talk about the future of statistics. From a London workshop, The Future of Statistical Sciences in 2013, they said that statistics is fundamentally important to society. It's critical for providing context for interpreting uncertainty. And society is acquiring data at an unprecedented, ever-increasing rate. As we know, we're handling new types of data, satellite imagery, sensor networks. And here, I think one of the most important observations is communication is critical. Misperceptions about statistics, cultural cognition of risk and uncertainty. So what is data science? Well, data science is really learning from data, just like statistics, and it applies a scientific method, processes, algorithms, and systems. I guess you could say it's more task-driven, computationally oriented version of statistics, but it's definitely multidisciplinary. If you know the statistical inquiry cycle that Carmichael Moron and Wild and Pankutch 1999 have there. I think many would agree with that kind of circular flow in the work we do, the inquiry cycle. So maybe you could sit back and say, okay, well, where do I spend most of my time on this cycle? And I think that would maybe help you define whether you're a statistician, data scientist, or both. But really what we're trying to do is communicate uncertainty, actionable knowledge, so generate actionable knowledge, insights across application domains. For those who aren't doing a lot of work, it's a multidisciplinary field, and deep learning really uses neural networks to learn and adapt to vast amounts of data. Machine learning is trying to go a little bit further and is trying to develop algorithms that learn on them by themselves without being explicitly programmed. And then eventually we're hoping that we can have full artificial intelligence where programs are essentially learning and reasoning like humans. But I think a lot of work needs to be done on the big data framework that ties in with these methods. So I ask you, what are the big data functions, strategies, architectures, algorithms, and processes that support these kind of automated models? And again, it's a roadmap of learning, from learning to adapt and then reasoning. And we have supervised, unsupervised learning methods, reinforcement, semi-supervised methods. They really depend on whether you have labeled, unlabeled data, so the type of data you have, but also the use case. So we need to think about what is the reasoning beyond just the method itself. How are we going to use these methods for reasoning in different use cases? Okay, so well, I could get into this a little bit more. I think maybe what I'll do is just mention that the trade-off between bias and variance is key. The trade-off between your training data, your validation data is very important. And for those who want to sort of investigate this more, here's a number of popular methods in neural networks and AI. They all have their own defining features. If you want to understand recurrent neural networks, they're sharing weights between time steps. And convolution neural networks really share weights in the spatial domain, so between regions. So that's a way of thinking. There's work that then even couples them together as sort of spatial temporal models. And each method, there's a lot of, even beyond what I'm showing you here, a broader hierarchy of methods, deep belief networks, and that look at taking models and packing them together. And they add more and more hidden layers, they call it, or feedback and memory into these systems. So it can get complicated, and understanding, okay, how what I've built then cross applies to another method can be a real challenge. And so in this sense, it's really important to kind of benchmark your improved model to other existing models, like a random forest or gradient boosting, right, to be able to translate the performance of your model to other competing approaches. Okay, well, I have a couple minutes to go. I think we all know that there's lots of data, and some believe that we've transitioned from a linear to exponential growth of human knowledge. I'll leave that for more debate in our question period. And also wanted to mention to you that there are these dimensions of big data, particularly with agriculture, where we have in situ or field-based sensor networks, unmanned imagery from drones, more traditional kind of networks of breeding culture banks, as well as the satellite data. There's a lot more work, though, that has to be done in looking at these V's, right? The variety, volume, velocity, value, variability, veracity of such data. And I actually think that would be a really good way of organizing some of our statistical databases when we're sharing them, to build it into that kind of dimension. For those who are wondering what a big data system looks like, well, I've been doing some work. I was out in Australia on an OECD funded project, and I've been putting together kind of what these systems look like. Canada has been looking at building a national data strategy, and many other countries are doing the same. But a policy or a data strategy has to be operationalized, and it can be a lot more complex than we can ever imagine, particularly when we have legacy, more traditional data sets, and then we think about how different users need to access this data and share it. So this is, I won't go into this in much detail, but just to share with you that there's a lot of thinking going on in big data systems. At the same time, we need to have people work on this and go beyond sort of single algorithm processing of one data set, actually think about the integrated platform of how we do this, and tailor it to statistics, right? Tailor it to developing, innovating in our fields. Up there, I have a link that you can click on when you get the slides to a recent paper I wrote on sort of imagining what is a society where big data is found, used heavily. What is it like? So what is the future in climate resilient societies using big data? So you might enjoy that as a read as well. So just to finish up here on a few slides, probably the most important slides. So is really, the theme of this meeting is inclusion, diversity, equity. And I was doing some thinking about this. And to me, inclusion is people, knowledge, perspectives, beliefs, and diversity, obviously flexible approaches, methodologies to enable wider applicability of what we're doing. And the equity is really the engagement side and choice, be able to understand how to make choices of whether it's approaches or tools, and also to assess the benefits with respect to, remember we were talking about groups and locations. So understand from our, where we're at in our food system, what are the benefits of using these tools? So all that's really important. And all I can do is first say, if you feel like you're not more involved, get more involved, right? AI for Good is an online community, has webinars all the time now, and really interesting. Climate Change AI, I joined recently and already have a project working with some people in Benin who are doing machine learning. So, sometimes we really just need to click the button and engage, force ourselves to engage in these areas, recognizing that we all have lots of learning to do, right? We all bring some knowledge to the table. I'm also, as I mentioned, on this group of Earth observations working group on disaster risk reduction, and there are geo communities. There's a current call for anyone working with satellite data and might be interested in checking out the GEO's current call for working program projects. There's also projects like the Global Burden of Crop Loss, organized by CABI, that you might be interested in. So really where I see things going is science in the cloud, right? So we think of our big data framework, but then we're saying, okay, how do we port this now to the cloud, right? And one of the initiatives we're starting to look at is answering those questions. So as part of the American Statistical Association's Committee on International Relations that I'm a vice chair of right now, we're hoping to have some friends of the committee join us, so eager students or others who really want to also engage in those questions. So if you're interested, let me know, and we can see how we could provide some recommendations for science in the cloud, whether it's data science, statistics, or more broadly. Again, there's all kinds of activities with TIES, ISI, ASA on student chapters, webinars, opportunities to co-create data, portals, synthesis, workshops. And I'd encourage you, even from maybe the discussion today, is form a transdisciplinary working group in an area of interest. Maybe it incorporates some AI, machine learning. Last week was actually the AAAI's conference, the American Association for Artificial Intelligence, and Bart Selman, who's from Cornell there, is the AAAI president, and he was talking about the wicked problem of developing an AI for scientific discovery, and he thought that would win the next Nobel Prize. So you can spend your time working on some of these larger wicked problems. Up if you're interested, right? There's AI for self-awareness as well. I see that a lot of companies are starting to actually look for research scientists looking at perception and cognition. So there's an interest there with Meta, with self-awareness. But I think where a lot of the conversation today is AI for SDGs, right? Connecting metrics, benchmarks, and outcomes. So what I'd love to see is all of us at least understanding where our work fits into each of those SDG goals. Maybe we should form a data science dashboard and start connecting our projects into each of those components. So at least each of us can see who else is working, right? In those goals and how we can connect. So there may be no universal generalizable solution, but still we need to integrate a broad suite of interoperable tools and practices that then we can adapt, right, to these different contexts and use cases. So let's turn our challenges into opportunities. And as Einstein had said, humanity is going to require a substantially new way of thinking if we're going to survive. Very important today. And again, sort of summarizing what I've shared with you today is that we need more evidence support for these urgent policy shifts that the high-level panel has highlighted. We need more policy coherence. So understanding how intervention types, action supports, and different guidance for transition making. We need better data sharing. We need these big data frameworks designed and operating. We need technical guidance for dealing with bottlenecks and sort of versioning. I mean, open source data is great, but if there's different versions floating around and we can't, and we're uncertain about our basic information going into the models, that's a problem, right? So we need to look at that. And again, emphasizing the need for more cloud-based solutions, particularly because that can support early warning, disaster risk preparedness, response, and assessment. I'd love to see longer-term multidisciplinary research agendas, really opportunities where we're not sort of hunting for funding every 2-4 years, maybe every year. We can really have an opportunity as researchers, professionals, to de-silo and branch out. And I think there's all kinds of opportunity between our natural sciences and the social sciences as well. I'd love to see integrated roadmaps across the entire value chain, from all the way from research we're doing, maybe more fundamental algorithm development, to deployment. And to do that, we need other potential sources of validation data from citizen science, crowdsourcing, participatory kind of activities. Obviously, make sure we have quality data to support our work, but I think there's all kinds of co-design opportunities there. As well, I think we need a lot more use cases. So there's too many different methods, right? And we can sort of, in some cases, we can be backward in what we're trying to do. Is when we're trying to build trust and transparency, if we have many different methods as a community, it can be really confusing for people outside who say, okay, well, which method do I use? I mean, I address this with farmers a lot. Do I just want a simpler method, or is there a more complicated method that's needed? So there's all kinds of issues there. And we need tangible outcomes. So beyond just sort of scientific papers and data sets that are thrown out there as outputs, we really need to say, how does all this come together for an effective, operationalizable solution, so an outcome, and then to test it in the real world. How does this actually increase or the measurable impacts? Either for a lot of people, it's a return on investment that helps to increase adoption rates. So finally, I'd like to just say, conclude with a couple more technical challenges or opportunities, and that's, again, thinking about this possibility space. Well, data science really provides that. I mean, it's the sort of more computational side, maybe, of statistics again, and there's all kinds of things we can do with computer codes and explore scenarios. I mean, we need to think more sort of knowledge-based, not just data-based thinking. And next week, there's actually a call in looking at cooperation between Canada and USA on quantum computing. And so I think there's you can go to IBMQ, and if you're interested, you can go there and sign up for an account and start playing around with some of the already running quantum computers, do some very basic modeling. But I think, when quantum computing comes online, I think it's going to enable all kinds of broader scenario exploration, and hopefully it will be accessible to a lot of people, and on the cloud. So we need broader dialogue. I think what we're doing today is amazing. So I encourage more dialogue throughout the year, right, as part of working groups. And I also would say, well, even if you're not an expert, I think there's a lot of role for statisticians to become sort of architects, right? As I was mentioning, sort of help design these big data frameworks. How does expert knowledge, human in the loop, we call it, how does expert knowledge come into these more automated AI methods? And can we test some different policy scenarios, which may not be exactly the way they're implemented in the real world, but at least provide some context to the modeling. Because there's lots of information loss in the real hierarchies, the top-down, bottom-up flows of information. I think we need to think about more hybrid integrated approaches as well, looking at assumptions, limitations, and constraints. And finally, look at delivering a whole range of tools and suites to sort of vary to the accuracy requirements of broader applications. Well, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I feel like we could just go on for hours listening to that. It was so much information, and really awesome to see the encouragement as well to a lot of students to engage. So as Emily put in the chat, we hope you can ask questions from the audience, but as the audience ramps up in thinking those questions, I actually wanted to circle back to this idea of creating the proactive early warning systems, adaptive systems, resilience in agricultural and food supply chains. And just, I know you mentioned a lot of the challenges, and I'm curious, what is the role in which AI, deep learning, some of these bigger computational techniques, what do they play as a role in overcoming some of those challenges? If we're thinking forward, how do we address this as very much the next generation going out and trying to tackle these problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all come from different disciplines, right? I mean, when you start off at university or college, you're interested in one particular facet of science and knowledge building, and so my early grounding was in physics and math, and then got interested in computers. And at some point, as I was saying, Ryan, as we were talking before the presentation, at some point it all came into one cloud, right? It all comes together. It sort of changes depending on the problem, and I think that's where we need to really maybe even design right back at the education systems, the data science programs, is to say, okay, maybe what we should be learning is components of the basic science that's going to be necessary to solve a given problem, right? Rather than trying to understand entire fields of disciplines. And I mean, there's benefits to both, but if you look at our I sit back and I say, well, we don't have a lot of time here. I mean, we're trying to go net zero by 2050. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gases. If we just look at climate change, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases by 45%, according to 2010 levels, by 2030, right? There isn't the time. So I guess in a long-term perspective, we can change our education system. What we need to do now is really harness the methods, the systems we have available, and do it accelerate the development of them. So I think when you sit looking at the problems that you're looking at right now, is to say, well, is there a way I could do this more efficiently, faster, maybe even compare what I'm doing to a different approach, right? To a more automated approach. Because I really see the future is going to be, because of our data loads, because of the amount of information that can either be true or false, as we're learning, because of that, statisticians play a real critical role. Whether you define yourself as a data scientist or statistician, the verification of data, validation of data is really critical. And to do that, a lot of the problems we work on don't have a lot of data behind them, right? Sometimes you do if you're lucky enough, but other times you're using what data you have available, and then you're looking for other ways, other data you could test it on. So I think that's really is connecting with people, find other data sets to validate, find other methods, maybe more AI-based methods. You don't necessarily, I think the key message is you don't necessarily have to become an expert in AI to do that. It's if you want to, I think there's opportunity there as well. But yeah, and underlying all this is we don't have a lot of time. We really society is desperate for solutions from professional scientists like ourselves.
Thank you.
So I have a question as well, in that how do you think we can implement AI more systematically to inform policies surrounding sustainable food systems?
Great question. I think I would start maybe back with the mention of, okay, well, we have this international policy, sustainable development goals. That seems to be an obvious step, is to say, let's organize ourselves under these goals. Let's, if I could click on goal 5, and under there I can get list of projects, list of people, list of, or maybe people wanting data, people wanting to test their method on different methods. Click on and get an idea of early warning systems, disaster risk systems, right? Understanding where people are, even within maybe a picture of the value chain. So who's doing research primarily, who's doing at the end user side, and really fitting into where are the current needs. Like if we sit back and go, well, where are the needs? How do I find out? Do I pick up a scientific paper in a journal to find that out, or is it through word of mouth? Even people like myself working in one agency, national agency, you'd think, well, does the amount of awareness of what's going on in your own agency increase by being in a complex or larger? Not necessarily, right? So I think no matter where you are, where you're working, there's always a need to be better informed and be more aware. And I think that's the first step, is having everyone sort of on the table to engage, right? And then finding ways to engage all the time, not waiting to be funded, not waiting to be invited into a working group. I think it's now, again, because of the urgency of what we're doing, it's time for younger people in the field, others with more energy, enthusiasm, motivation, passion, to simply, let's get going. If you see a need, let's start working together, find others who are interested in helping and push it forward.
Great. So I'm hearing more transparency on projects and on what our needs are, but then that active participation and engagement at all levels of, I'm just starting off learning about data science and AI, and then also those that are extremely proficient, taking us under your wing and sharing those skills and initiatives. So
that's really where the learning is going to happen. Yeah. It's from people who may know more about one aspect, can bring it and share it with others. And that's where the speed of learning will take place. So, we see AI methods and we say, oh, well, they learn so fast, but hey, we can learn fast too, right? There's ways we can organize to do that as well.
Great.
I believe, Elena, you had a question?
Actually, so just a second in the chat, question from Aram, and then I will hold my question till the end.
Okay. Aram's question was about hearing more about ideas of how we'd actually do more of that true multidisciplinary natural science and social science research. He has students who are seeing the functioning of food systems that promote unhealth for profit and get disheartened about whether any substantive change can happen. So, Nathaniel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Even at the level of sharing public and private data, there's hurdles, right? And I think there's legal questions, there's different domains of how we deal with these problems. But let's just say that the first start of this is getting everyone around the table. So one way you could get a group of stakeholders, maybe local, regional, or national stakeholders together, and build trust. Share the different approaches and be clear, frank about what the concerns and issues are. But you have to have really a group that's really willing to work together, kind of negotiate how to approach things in a different way. So they have to be, and I think that's the thing, is to look for sort of sentinel groups, key players who can influence larger changes in the system, right? So leaders, particularly who are engaged in these areas, are maybe the best ones to transform some larger agency. So things can really, if we understand our collective behavior and the models of collective behavior in society, things can really change quickly if you do it right. And we need to have those frank discussions. We need to as I was mentioning, that this could be done as working groups or more stakeholder, groups based on a certain use case. Maybe there's a water problem in a certain region, and there's transboundary issues there. That could be a focusing. But the thing is that a lot of that discussion can be lost if it's just in some report and some. We need to bring that information out more into the collective. So we need to make sure we're aware of all these different discussions and things that are taking place. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see natural scientists, social scientists sitting down together. But obviously there's challenges there, right? If I show up an equation on the screen, right, I can't expect whoever who's not, a non-mathematician to sit there and understand it. And so really, in a larger sense, it comes down to communication. Can we communicate things without equations? Can we communicate things simpler, even though it's a complex issue? Can we home in on what the key areas are?
And actually, my question was exactly on the same venue. Thank you very much for that transition. I was actually very much interested how you see science and scientific communication, because we can hide behind these very complicated worlds and words and equations. But in reality, we need to build bridges across disciplines. And I'm just wondering how you see strategies and implementation of these strategies for science, like effective science and scientific communication.
Yeah, I think there's a long way to go there, unfortunately. I'm optimistic, though. I remain optimistic. I think this is why I don't think there's one answer to that. I think the way to start that is to get people talking. And so I would say that really, particularly any field, even if you're in fundamental physics, right? You need to talk about someone working with the data, or broader. So I think you need to be able, no matter what field you're in, you need to be able to relay it in such a way that it's people can understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, understand the assumptions, right? Oftentimes we're not clear on the assumptions. Also, that methods can be adapted. So the assumptions that you're maybe simplifying in terms of understanding, generating some insights, may not be directly applicable to the real world, may not match those. So we have to be careful on how we just pick and grab methods and data sets. The worst case would be we have all these data sets and methods available, and people who don't understand the details are just picking and choosing and reapplying them without understanding the key assumptions and constraints. So, but I think the way to do it is to, AI can be of a benefit. We have to make sure that we're guiding it and we're part of these automated systems. I think we have to embrace it. It's not going to go away. The increase of data is not going to go away. So the sooner we get involved and actually be architects of these big data frameworks, architects of the science in the cloud, architects of how maybe we should do an experiment, a social experiment of putting, different collections of statisticians and data scientists together and just see what happens, right? And maybe there's some social experiments that could be done to understand that. And I mean, even from having an AI kind of agent to help identify who could team up on an issue, right? So once we have these SDGs and we have more information on how we all relate in what we're doing under these SDGs, maybe we could click on a button and it would suggest to us 3 other people around the world who are doing very similar work. And that's the kind of thing that could be identified with an AI agent, an AI algorithm. And so I asked myself, well, why aren't we doing that? I mean, even if it's sort of, we don't end up working with those people, or at least it's informing us of some people doing some similar work. So why aren't we using these tools already? Right? I think we're hesitating maybe too much. We're each field is kind of, we're nervous, right, to get out of our comfort zones. Mm-hmm. And we have to. We don't have time for these issues.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. That was very, very insightful.
I think I feel like we could talk all day, but unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up now. If you do have questions, I know we've shared Nathaniel's slides for you to be able to access that. His information, I believe, or his contact information is on the slide. So please do follow up if you have questions. We've put in the chat the links for the upcoming sessions, and overall, just a huge resounding thank you, Nathaniel, for just a wonderful presentation and so much to look forward
Thank
to
you so much.
from the student body. So thank you, and we hope you'll join us in the next one.
Will do. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks to all attending today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.